my entire persona online, as well as how I view doing advocacy work and charity work, is that you have to have fun while you're doing things. So David and I have been working for Mount Sinai and Enable Gamers on a project to help bring accessibility to the esports space for a long, long time. And the whole entire meeting is basically us just making fun of each other for an hour long. And in between there, we come up with one or two good things. And that was sort of the basis of the conversation. Was, unfortunately, our profession tends to believe that the F word is really, really bad. We don't want to talk about fun. We don't want to talk about how what we do is bringing fun to people's lives. Even if you look at the Able Gamers mission statement, it talks about creating, fostering inclusive environments and fighting social isolation and improving the lives quality for people with disabilities. But the problem is that we don't talk about fun. We never do. And one of the things that David and I sort of bonded over was the fact that a lot of these institutions are just now catching up to the fact that game therapy is actually fun for the patients. You can have a patient who doesn't want to perform normal PTOT, but if you introduce a video game, suddenly they're all interested in it. And that's the gateway drug to get people in order to do the therapies that they should be doing in the first place. So whenever I'm doing these kind of presentations, I don't have very long speeches with PowerPoints and whatnot. I kind of leave the floor open more for you to ask questions and for me to sit here and pontificate, because let's face it, we've all had enough lectures in our lives. You don't need another one of those. But the part of the lecture that I do like to always give is that whenever you're thinking about your work and helping people with disabilities be able to get back into whatever life activities you're helping with, you're doing it because they need that part of their life to connect to somebody else. You're not actually doing it for the most part because they need an ADL. You're doing it because that's how you stay connected with the world. For us at Able Gamers, we do that with video games. We connect people through video games, whether that's a mother and a daughter, or a father and a son, or if it's just people who are living thousands of miles apart and they can't get together because of, I don't know, some weird global pandemic. We have these connection points that can continue to make us be human. And if you've ever followed Able Gamers work, you know that we are a humanities charity. Able Gamers is an organization that helps with the disability side of things. Video games are just a tool. And there's, a fantastic story I love telling of one of our exploits in Chicago, where we were at a disabilities expo called Abilities Expo, and this was back in 2013 or 14 up in Chicago, just outside the city. We're there with a Forza booth, which is a racing game, and the racing game, pretty well known, Forza, that you run around in tracks and compete for golden titles and whatnot. There was a family, a mother and a father, a brother and a sister, and another brother in a wheelchair. And this brother in a wheelchair was reclined back in a manual wheelchair, 45-degree angle, had a heart monitor on his table and an oxygen tank in the back, and just kind of staring off into the lights, not really focused on anything in particular. And the father and the mother kept looking over at our booth. We kept beckoning them to come over, and they just weren't having it. They would not. Until finally I badgered them enough to come over to the Forza game and to give it a try. And they rolled up, and it's the founder of Able Gamers, Mark Barley, and myself. And we're there. We're talking to the mom and the dad and, making small talk. All the while we're doing our observational assessment in order to see what abilities that this young man has. And we noticed that he's got some movement in the anterior of his left foot, and he can just flex just a little bit. So we sort of nod at each other and agree, ask the family if we can take the footrest off the wheelchair, plug the gas pedal looking controller into our little Xbox adaptive controller device, hold it up to the child's foot. The child pushes down lightly on the device. The car in the video game comes roaring to life, drives across the street, slams into the wall, and the kid just bubbles and giggles. And it's honestly one of the best days I've ever had working for Able Gamers, seeing the joy on this kid's face. And it would be an amazing story if it stopped there. But the next day, the dad comes up to me, squeezes me on the shoulder, and I turn around. I look up, and keep in mind, I have SMA. I'm in a wheelchair, literally 4.5 foot off the ground. So I'm looking up at this rock-looking Marine guy, 6.5 feet off the ground, and he's got tears in his eyes. And I'm like, "Oh, Mr. So-and-so, is everything okay?" Yeah, everything's fine. I just had to come back, and I had to tell you. Thank you for giving my son his dream back. And I'm like, no problem. It's what we do here. No big deal. And I kind of brushed it off, as I'm sure all of you have brushed off things before. And he squeezes my shoulder harder and says, "No, seriously, you have to understand, my son is nonverbal. He can't communicate. He has no way of reaching out from what's inside of his head, except on Saturday mornings, we watch cartoons and we lay on the couch and he lays his head in my lap and we enjoy our favorite cartoons together. And every time a video game commercial comes on, he starts wiggling and bubbling. And I know that he wants to play that video game, and I couldn't give that to him. And you guys gave it back to him. And at this point, I'm sort of falling out of my wheelchair because I'm just like, oh, it's okay. And it really was the moment that I learned that it's not about the video games. What we do at Able Gamers and what Mount Sinai here is doing is helping people to connect to each other. And that's really why we're all in here, is for the fun and for the people and the humanitarities of it. That's my speech. Have a good day, everybody. Take care.
Steve, can I ask you to, I'll start with a more boring style question, but I'd love to hear how, from the point in your life where you started to get into gaming and then the transition into thinking that you could use it as a tool for, social connectedness and so on.
So you're asking, how are we using it to connect for social value?
Yeah. So how did you, I suppose just a bit of a summary about your path to get to this point from when you were younger and through now, how you're using gaming?
Yeah, for me personally, video games were always something that was able to conquer the barriers that the real world would put up. So when I was in the end of high school, I was in AutoCAD class learning how to draw hair salons and spending my time dreaming about whether or not the hairdo cone should be purple or blue. Purple, by the way, was the color I chose. It was imperative to keep connected to my peers and to keep doing that social thing. But they really got addicted to going to a local club. And I'm not against clubs. I can't talk very loud, so it's a little bit annoying. But the problem with this particular club called the Zoo, yes, that's the real name of the club, was that it had my arch nemesis, the single stair, as the entry point. So I wasn't able to go inside of the said club for social activity. So I had to find something else that I could keep in common. And one of my friends had told me about this online persistent world called Ultima Online. It's a very, very old video game now, back when dinosaurs roamed the earth. We would play online for hours, and the idea, the hook of Ultima Online was that you could have this second life where you could build friendships and guilds and have experiences of social equality in this video game. And it allowed me to stay connected to those people that I wanted to, despite being very, very far apart. So my journey with video games starts from a long time ago, where I realized how important it was that these video game interactions allow you to substitute real life interactions. They say that you can only make friends in a few places in this world. You either have a connection point of work or play or a social circumstance like church. There is always one connector that accounts for something like 90% of your friends. Some people estimate closer to 100. There are very few times that we just make friends with people out on the street. You don't walk up to a random person and be like, "Hey, you want to be besties?" It doesn't happen. It's creepy, by the way. Don't do that. So we have to have these parts where we can be together, and video games give you that back. Because if I can't go to the club, or if I can't go to the local pizza parlor, then that kind of interaction is essential to who you are. And so that's where a lot of this started for me, was realizing that video games gave me something back, and if it gave it back to me, it probably did others. And it turned out in the long run that my hunch was very correct.
You know, one of the things you said, Steve, was what reminded me of a quote from this TV show. I love quotes from TV shows and movies. *Halt and Catch Fire*. You ever watch *Halt and Catch Fire*? You must have. It's about like gaming and.
You're literally making it up. That's all I got. I don't.
All right, it was on AMC. Well, the quote anyway
Okay.
was computers aren't the thing; they're the thing that helps you get to the thing. And that was like kind of the series finale. It was never about inventing computers. So like that really resonated, because when I heard that quote, I was like, yeah, that's the thing. It begins and ends with humans. And when you said that Able Gamers wasn't really a technology organization, you're a humanities organization, who do you need to educate? Who does Able Gamers exists to let the world who doesn't understand? It's the thing that helps them. So who are those people, and how do you go about, because this is the thing you have to rage against. What are the messages that you need to educate of why accessibility needs to be everywhere?
Well, I do enjoy raging against the machine, as anyone does. My my answer to that would be simple. It depends on what era you're talking about. So when Able Gamers started 15 years ago, it was a general education outreach campaign. It was letting people know that not only do gamers with disabilities exist, today we know that there's more than 46 million potential gamers with disabilities in America alone. But back then, we were just taking random guesses based on the numbers that were put out by the Electronic Arts Association and the World Health Organization, and doing the tabulations of guessing. Now we have a better concrete answer. But back then, we knew there was something in the millions. So we knew that there were, in fact, lots of people that needed our help. We just didn't know how many or how much. So at some point, the industry got that. They got the fact that, in fact, these human beings do exist with disabilities. And it's not something that we had to fight for anymore. We changed from advocacy to action. And now our core audience of people that we're trying to convince are the caretakers. We're trying to convince the people that are the old guard at hospitals and rehabilitation places that are still putting up the gatekeeping and the fences and saying that game therapeutics are a passing fad or something you should do on the weekends. These are not the people that understand the purpose of these video games. They think that it's just going to be something that's eventually going to fade away. And sometimes they're right. Though any of you remember the Kinect for the Xbox, we found out that nobody wants to stand up and jump around in front of their couch for 8 hours a day. You actually want to sit down on the couch and play with your friends. And so sometimes they are fads, but the idea of gaming in general just keeps on going. So we reach them simply by making the argumentative case that you're helping people by tricking them into doing the things that they don't want to do. I don't think there's a therapist on the planet that hasn't had a bunch of people who obviously need therapy, but they either are lazy or they don't feel like it, or they're hurting too much. And so all they're focused on is the pain. And there's a bunch of in-betweens there as well, where people just don't want to do the therapy that they should be doing. So games tend to make you forget about it. There's a very famous case out of the Cleveland Children's Clinic where they were showing this zombie game. That literally was just, you had to stand up on your feet. Forgive me if I don't stand up, but if you had to stand up on your feet and make like a roaring zombie noise at a Kinect-like device, which it could see your movement. And they would put these kids that were trying to do testing to see whether or not drugs were having an effect on their ability to stand and walk forward. And they couldn't get the kids to do it. But they decided that, in fact, they will use these video games to do this testing. And when they did, it improved the scores by up to tenfold. So they found that not only were these video game therapies great at getting people to do what they actually could do, they were great at showing what they could do if they put their mind to it. Not at the point where they were thinking about the pain or the boredom of standing there and showing somebody that you can make a fist and roar at the air, but actually like getting visual feedback from a video game. It helped them be able to continue on that path of showing how well these drugs actually do. So there's a plethora of different reasons as to why we need to continue reaching out to these older guard of caretakers that aren't quite getting it yet. That game therapy is one of the waves of the future, but there's an in between virtual reality and where we are today.
Yeah, when you put it like that, I mean, what therapist hasn't brought a ball out or try to make a sport out of, like, that does not seem like a reach. No one would argue that, but for some reason when there's a controller and a screen, all of a sudden it's not serious. But when you like you frame it, it makes complete sense.
Well, I've had a lot of arguments with people who are in those positions so far, and it has taught me that you must present your case in a fashion in which they can't argue against it. And when you're framing it as you're helping the patient to perform to their maximum potential, it really helps make that argument easier to digest.
You use that word argument. I've kind of been a little bit of a voyeur of some arguments you've had on Twitter with people who will say, "Hey, listen, why do we need to make this game adaptable?" And I've seen some of your framing of the conversation being more adaptability doesn't make less fun for you. It's not pie. Like by giving adaptability, it's not taking anything away. So I think you did that.
No, well, thanks. I think it's important that we remember in all of these conversations that we're not asking people to give up parts of themselves, that we're asking to allow adaptations for others. And so when we're reaching out to people, whether they're trolls on the internet or the funding body of a giant hospital, what you have to remember is that we are all on the same team and all on the same page. And sometimes people forget that. They tend to think like, well, there's in therapy and it's, well, if we end game therapy, then we can't do others. No one's saying that. I'm not saying that you shouldn't do physical rehabilitation. I'm not saying that you shouldn't run on the treadmill or the exercise bike to keep your quads going. I'm just saying that there are ways that this can be used in substitute or in addition as a supplement. And unfortunately, there are people on the internet who do not believe that we should be advocating for accessibility in video games. There are people who would prefer to be gatekeepers. And, as unfortunate as that is, that I think that's to be said for any medicine or science. I think at one time or another, probably everyone on this call has had a battle where someone has been anti-science or anti-medicine. So I think it's just something, unfortunately, a part of the human condition. Some people don't believe in it, but I do believe that those of us who believe in progress in science, we are pushing the right way with this kind of stuff.
All right. I guess we're not using this hand up thing. I'm going to lower my hand. Steve, I mean, really central to able gamers is pushing up against social isolation. I think most of the people on this Zoom better than many know the damage that social isolation can do. Prescriptions for socialization, good idea or bad idea? Where do you land on something like that, making it a medical priority?
There was a great study from PopCap that we did a while ago, back in Able Gamers' infancy, probably I'd say maybe the first 4 years. PopCap games are the ones that brought us Plants vs. Zombies, for any of those of you who have played that in the past. Not a giant company, but big enough that they wanted to be able to do research on social isolation, silver gamers, basically people over the age of 50, who are doing this for recreation or for rehabilitation. And what the study discovered was that for the mind, social impact is as important as sunlight is to our body's systems. That literally the UV rays and the same vitamins we get from sunlight for our bodies is the same level of importance that social input has for our mental well-being. So, I think that when you have a prescription for hanging out with friends is hard because you can't force people to make friends. And it's really hard because it falls to the social workers, and they're often very overworked and overwhelmed. But here's the thing, if you're not social, we found over and over again that people can wither and die. And that's something that I think we don't underscore enough in society, particularly when it comes to having a doctor look at your health. I can be in perfect condition, but if my loved one just passed away and I've got no one else on this earth, my brain will start telling my body that it's not doing so well. And then all of a sudden, we're going to start having a lot of health complications that have no reason. And it's because my mind started manifesting those into my body. So I think there's a lot of science out there, and we just talk about progression as a thing. I think that's something that we're going to continue to see as we move forward, as people figure out whether or not the mind has an effect and influence over your physical body. And I truly believe that it does. Those who we've helped through Able Gamers have started doing so much better. There was a kid named Zane who was at the pediatric hospital here in Aliquippa, and he was with SMA. He has the same kind of condition that I have, actually, where his muscles were getting deterioration and having a hard time functioning on a lot of levels. And he used a Dynavox to talk. And for those of you who don't know, Dynavox is the device you see on Stephen Hawkins or someone looking at in order to speak, and then it talks for you. Well, he would often complain about doing homework that his eyes were getting tired. He didn't want to keep looking at the screen, keep making it say words to do his homework, and you just couldn't make him do it. And then I brought in a video game called Diablo 2. Diablo 2 is like a top-down isometric video game where you run around and slash monsters and get loot and be the hero. And we found that putting that on the screen, he would do that for 4 or 5 hours at a time. And then after that, he would get his homework done, and he would do the entire thing just so he could go back and play more video game. So it wasn't so much that his eyes actually were tired. It was that his mind was telling him that he was tired and he couldn't do it anymore because he was bored. He just didn't want to do it. But as soon as he had a reason to keep doing it, and to get through it so that he could get back to the activity that he wanted to do, suddenly his muscles worked enough that he was able to do it. And so he was still tired and would still often sleep for hours after that. But we found that the prescription for him and going and playing with his friends turned out to be the correct decision, because it started making him have a better outlook for health on his life.
Yeah, thanks for that. I mean, that's amazing. I mean, this is one of the things that I think that we struggle with, because we see social isolation as such a critical need. It's a health need. You know, it's you know, you were mentioning sunshine. We have data and studies that we talk about which equate it, you know, isolation to smoking cigarettes. You know,
Yep.
like 14 cigarettes a day kind of thing. And then there are biometrics that get demonstrably affected. But one of the things that I struggle with in terms of interventional options is it has to be authentic, right?
Yeah.
You can't be like, you must interact with this person and enjoy it. You know, like that's not something that you can write down on a prescription pad. Whereas Able Gamers seems to have nailed that in just authentically creating a community. And I think, especially in our profession, this group, where we live in the Department of Rehab Medicine, and we see the value of creating engaging rehab environments versus sterile rehab environments, and creating moments of authentic connection versus creating moments of protocolized formula rehab. I think that we could probably learn a lot from how you authentically self-organize your community.
I appreciate that. I think that there are different therapies and different situations for every outcome that you desire. So I like to think about this more group therapy versus one-on-one therapy. So why did group therapy come about in psychology? Well, because some people aren't happy talking one-on-one, and some people don't need to talk to a doctor. They need to vent. They need someone to listen to their problems. They actually don't really need anybody to give them advice. What they need is for someone to sit there and listen while they complain about how their husband never does the dishes anymore. That's what they're really looking for. And so video game therapy was developed as something that was supposed to be in addition to, and to help correct a need that we very much had, which was people need to be able to get together. So if you create communities that can play with each other, that's often one of the best things that we ever did. I mean, the Quad Gods are a fantastic example of this, but it goes out beyond that. There's a hospital in New York named Helen Hayes, and Helen Hayes Hospital has one of our expansion packs. We love those guys up there. They're great. When we put an expansion pack on their first floor outside their giant $1 million marble fountain in the middle of the lobby there, we set up an eye gaze station where people could play this little game called Earth Defender, and you're the planet Earth and asteroids are coming to get you, and the only way you can save Earth is if you stare at the asteroids and it blasts them with a laser, and it saves them from destroying the Earth. And so we had a lot of fun showing the different patients there how to play with this, asteroid game. And so at the end of our 2.5 days there, we left the room with a bunch of the patients still inside, and we went to talk to the hospital's doctors on the outside. Some of the big wigs were there, and we wanted to make sure that they were happy with everything and whatnot. And we started talking to them for a couple minutes. And at the end of the talk, I overheard as 3 of the patients were in there making fun of each other for which one had the best high score. And these patients that had not otherwise interacted with each other because they were on different units were now organizing a tournament for the patients in the hospital, where 5 or 6 of them were going to come play with another 5 or 6, and who could kick whose butt. And they were already talking about the leaderboards, and we had only been out of there for 10 minutes. And it was a really great example of how, if you set up the community, it will follow. It's that old field of dreams. If you build it, they will come. And that's really kind of what we're trying to do, is you build this area where people can be social. And if you leave them to their own devices, they'll be social, whether they want to or not, because the human spirit tends to be pretty competitive when you come down to it.
Absolutely. And as we shift virtual in everything, obviously Able Gamers has been a virtual community for a really long time. Have you noticed that anything in particular really works for creating effective and authentic virtual community building?
Yeah, when it comes to building your community, you have to have a touch point. You have to have either a day of the week that people come to the same place, or you have to have a small tournament, something that gets them to be involved with each other and allows them to have interaction. And then you have to set up their expectations properly. A lot of people will come to Able Gamers and be like, man, I can't wait to play in virtual reality, and it's going to be awesome and great. And I have to be like, whoa, wait a minute. It's not Star Trek. You don't have the holodeck. We're not on here talking about, the latest and greatest in virtual environments. We're talking about a place where you can play with other human beings. And augmented reality is really where that's at. Going out and catching, the latest the latest Pokemon with your friends, or going out to a park and doing that kind of thing. That tends to work much better as a way of convincing people to interact, rather than trying to set them up for expectations that they can't reach. So studies have shown so far that having something like an on the rails marine biology simulator is great for patients who are in pain, because it makes their brain concentrate on the screen and not on the pain receptors telling them that their skin has been burned off, right? Which is fantastic. It helps lower pain. But on the flip side, you have people who don't understand that that is a solo activity all by themselves. So once again, they're back to being isolated and they're on their own. So if I can introduce someone who is extremely focused on pain to an environment where they play with 2 or 3 friends at a canasta table or some spades, even though I might think it's silly and boring, they might think it's exciting and they're happy to play some cards with their friends. And so that's kind of what you do, is you ask your patients what it is that excites them, what makes them interested. And then you either sit with them and let them get hooked on the feeling, and then they're off on their own, or you put them in an environment where they're going to have more interaction with more people, and then again, it's not the video game or the technology that holds people, it's the social contact.
Steve, what are the things in the general disability space at the moment that are making you quite passionate / maybe do your head in at times?
The things that make you passionate, in my world, it's all about allowing people to define their own versions of passion and fun, and fighting against the stereotypical thoughts of this is the way that you have fun. This is the way that you are meant to enjoy XYZ. Those kind of myths, and really about what we do at Able Gamers, what you do here at Mount Sinai. It's people tend to think that our jobs are a bit like working at a fast food restaurant, that you just pull up and someone says you need a number 7 with special sauce, and then all of a sudden you're cured. And that's never how it works. It's never that easy. It's all about that individualized treatment and figuring out how you do that as effectively as possible. So for me, a lot of it right now is bashing my head up against the wall of stereotypical stigmas, having people continually think that not only is it as easy as handing someone the right controller, but people don't really need any more help or assistance beyond that. And there's so much more to it. It's so much of what we do is the personal side of things. We spend 8 to 16 hours at Able Gamers with each individual assessment, making sure that people get not only what they need, but that they're fully helped on their way to being back and integrated into video game culture as much as they can possibly be. And sometimes it's very simple solutions, and sometimes it's very complicated solutions, and anywhere in between. But by and large, people just sort of have this attitude that it should be much easier than it is to help someone figure out their entire life and fears and aspirations and ideas that they'd like to have. You start talking to one of your clients about how they want to play Diablo and smash monsters, and then they offhandedly mention, like, yeah, it just kind of sometimes takes me out of it because I'm worried that my helper is not going to hear me 3 rooms away. And you go, oh, well, have you heard about an Alexa device? And they can actually drop in on different rooms. And if that has, fail-safe, if the person passes out in the other room, you can actually use this application to call for help. And you're not talking about video games anymore. Now you're talking about quality of life. Now you're talking about security and safety. And it's amazing how many of these different video game conversations end up in really real life situations that maybe not everyone would quite give them credit for. So other than the organizers of this giant meeting, for those of you who are now playing charades on your phone, what kind of questions would you like to ask?
Hi, thank you so much. I was a little bit late to the start, but so I don't know if it was maybe covered in some way, but I'm just curious, what do you think, what do you see like the future of adaptive gaming being, like kind of like shoot for the stars, like ideal kind of situation, I guess, either, within people's homes or related to rehab?
Yeah,
like exciting in terms of, what's going on in advances right now?
Yeah, absolutely. We didn't cover that, so that's a great question. I think that the future is both brighter than we think it is, but it's also a little less space than reality than I think some people are considering it. So, we alluded earlier to raising that $1 million for charity, and one of the things I've experienced just in this last week of giving interviews for that is people saying, well, in the future, what will Able Gamers do once, gaming is accessible for everybody, and there's no more fighting to do. And I'm like, man, I wish that was a reality. Unfortunately, there are so many disabilities in the world, and there are so many different kinds of disabilities and different variables that come out for the prognosis of what they're expected to be on, There is no world in which every video game is accessible to every single person. And to tell patients that is really sort of setting them up with some very dangerous expectations. Instead, the future of gaming looks much more where video game companies come along and they add as much as they possibly can for options in video games. Games like The Last of Us 2 have 60 some odd different options that you can turn on. And even at that, someone like me, I can't play it, even at that, because the technology isn't there to allow me to reach the software. So the future of gaming is there will be a greater connection point where a larger amount of those people can play, and it's going to be a hardware solution and a software solution. Things like voice controls are going to be more of a thing in the future. Controlling with your eyes, we found that your eyeballs are one of the last things to go, no matter what disability you're talking about. For some reason, the muscles in the eyes are one of the last to be affected, whether that's ALS or MS or MD. It doesn't matter. It's one of the very last things that you can't move anymore. So we're going to find more visual controlled games. We're going to see things that are controlled with BCI. We're going to have more interaction with robotic Jacob arms and stuff like that that allow you to interact with these kind of games on a very intricate level. But it's also going to be a little more technology focused. There is some fantastic IR sensing technology out now that you don't even have to touch a controller, that you can just move your fingers near a controller and allows you to control the entire interface. And we have figured out in some of our lab experience how you can position those around fingers and not have to touch a controller, which is great for people who have pain in their hands, arthritis, et cetera, et cetera. And I think we're just going to keep coming up with more of these technologies and how they interface as time goes on. But particularly, I'm excited for the augmented reality I mentioned earlier, where I think people are going to be leaning on what we call at Able Gamers helping hand. Helping hand is when a video game helps you defeat the game itself. So it's an NPC companion coming along with you in a video game, or it's the game pointing at a puzzle piece and highlighting it in a certain color so you know that's where you're supposed to click. I think as we continue to advance, we're going to find more clever and personal ways to help people overcome their weaknesses in video games and really focus on their strengths.
Steve, I do have a question. Thank you so much for your time and sharing all this, knowledge with us. But, as gaming accessibility has definitely come a long way in recent years, I was just wondering if there are any recent advancements that really particularly stand out for you.
Yeah, for us, it was really having the adaptations of adapters. So what happened when we first started out, the Xbox 360 was just the coming out, and we started making all these controllers that would work for the 360, and we got to the point where 3.5 years later we had just about all the main disability types covered underneath the housing of what we could do. And they changed to the Xbox One, and we lost all that progress because the computer language didn't allow it to talk backwards. There was no backwards compatibility. And now working with Xbox, we built that in where the next generation will talk in the same language of this. So it's the super boring and unsexy answer for sure. But it is the truthfully helpful answer was when we had a coding language that could speak across generations. Now we're able to come up with controller adaptations that can transcend generations. And so the things that work on the Xbox One now will work on the Xbox Hamburger or whatever they decide to call the next generation. And we'll be able to keep pushing forward on the same devices. So you actually learn a lot more in what we do from failure. For example, there's a device called a GrizzPaw. If you've never worked with a GrizzPaw, it is essentially a one-handed video game controller that you have to put your entire hand over in order to push the buttons. It seems like a good thing in thinking about the way controllers work. What if I could just put my hand on it, and like a sci-fi show, you just wiggle your hand around and it controls the device? Well, in reality, it makes people curl their hand up like they're trying to make a Pac-Man symbol, and they get cramping in the back of their hand and their forearm, and then they start having atrophy, and then that's even worse. So what we're finding a lot of this is that it may seem good in the short term, but then long term, these controllers are actually making your hand work in ways that it doesn't want to work. So the ergonomics are coming along, and we're being able to find better ways of keeping these controllers in people's hands for the long term as opposed to the short term.
That's a good point.
Hi,
Thank you
Steve.
so much.
I would like to well, thank you for the talk. It's definitely different, and I really enjoy it. As a person who has never played to any video game, I have this idea that they are all like very big guys and girls, you know, like like people that they go to the gym a lot, right? I mean, I'm just thinking about all these kill, I call kill, like, you know, all these war kind of things. There are those and cars and things like that. So excuse me for my ignorance, but just thinking about inclusion and visibility, it's very nice that everybody can play these video games, but is there, from your perspective, like any initiative or would you like to see people that they are blind or that they have like any kind of disability within those video games?
Representation is something that we continue to push for at Able Gamers, and having people being able to see themselves. Xbox just did a wonderful thing by adding avatars. You can actually make yourself as a cartoonish character on the screen. And this has been something that has been around since the beginning, a decade or more. But if you identified with having a wheelchair or a walker or anything like that, there was nothing for you. And recently they made that where it is a thing that you can have a walker, you can put your person in a wheelchair, and so you can see yourself a little bit more than you used to be able to. And that has helped with representation on one level. And now we just need to continue to see more and more people who are having mobility aids or different visual disabilities in video games, particularly the area that we push for is for them not to be the bad guy. If you don't play video games, chances are you have watched movies, and more often than not, you see the bad guy, or even in a book, has the eye patch and is in the wheelchair and hates the world because they're disabled and fuck the world and all that. And you know, David said I'm allowed one F-bomb. That was where I chose to use it. So you know, the thing that comes with being the bad guy is that you're you know, railing against the system that wasn't built for you. And what we want to see is having the heroes being disabled and having the people who are, you know, out there fighting for the world being on that plane where you are representing yourself and the different kinds of people that are out there. So I think that it's something that we're going to continue to work on. There are some great advocates out there that are pushing for greater representation in video games as well. Because they're not all big burly fighters, that's for sure. Some of us are very much made of 47% mashed potatoes like me. So, you know, there's that in-between area where I think we can all see ourselves in video games, and customization is going to continue to advance as we move forward. Unfortunately, it's something that we have continued to struggle with, not only in disability, but just for people in general. We all want to see ourselves in the things that we play. And I think as this continues to move on, we're going to keep seeing it more and more.
Sign of good storytelling, right? I mean, it used to be make the video game about the movie, and now it's the other way around. It's storytelling. If I don't see myself in there, why would I go?
Exactly.
Steve, I'd love, you know, your opinion on as we delve into this sort of storytelling edge. I mean, I think that obviously it's not happening quickly. It's slowly trickling into mainstream narrative and mainstream storytelling. I was just watching like A Quiet Place, for instance. So you see that layered into the storytelling there. It's like a family with a deaf child, and so of course they have an advantage because they can all sign, and then you see that the, you know, hearing aid is killing the monsters and so on and so forth. Who's, you know, I thought that was like, in my opinion, that was a good example. It wasn't like inspiration porn. It was just pretty much naturally layered into the narrative, and off we went. Who's doing a good job? Who's doing a bad job? What are good examples? What are bad examples? in terms of representation, in your opinion? What do you look at and just roll your eyes? And second point, I would never limit you to one F-bomb, by the way. So don't even lie.
You know, the main thing for me has always been when a show or a movie or a series puts in a token person. Now, if you're talking about a minority, if you're talking about someone who's not native English speaker, or who is Black or Latino, or even in today trans, you see one character that has something in that. And so you saw that in X-Men with Professor Xavier. And if I had $1 for every single person who thought that my favorite X-Men was Professor Xavier, I'd be a rich millionaire on a beach somewhere taking this call under a palm tree. These are fake palm trees behind me, by the way. So when you come to representation, the worst part about it is sometimes people add one character that has one disability, and then that's kind of it. I think about shows like NCIS, which has a disabled character, and it's great because they're part of the show and whatnot. But they're also just one character, and everyone else is able-bodied, mostly white, and is obviously just the one particular person that is supposed to check off a box. And I don't think until we have a game that shows disabilities everywhere, we're really going to get to that point. Overwatch, which is a Blizzard game where you shoot each other in sort of different fun scenarios, they have a lot of characters that do have disabilities. And the shocking thing for most people who are listening to me talk about disabilities, they're like, wait, Overwatch has disabled characters? I don't remember that. Well, that's the point, is that all the characters have disabilities, but they're secondary to what the characters can do. One character called Junkrat, he has a peg leg, but they don't ever focus on that. What they focus on is the Junkrat has a giant wheel that can run after you like a race car and blow up. Farah is a character that is supposedly quadriplegic, but she has a robotic flying suit that allows her to go around and shoot rockets at people from up in the sky, but nobody focuses on the fact that she's quadriplegic. Symmetra is a character that makes little teleporters that you jump through in order to save your team and get behind your enemy, but she's actually autistic. So there are characters and there are lores that people can do for representation that allow disability to be included more, because again, 46% of the American populace potentially has some sort of disability. If you're into games, up to 100 million of us have a disability. It's way less of a minority than people like to think it is. 1 in 3 people in their lifetime will be disabled, whether they call themselves that or not. And so one of the things we really have to strive for, I think, as professionals, is to continue to remind people in our world that it's a greater part of what we do. You have people like, my friend Ryan Reynolds, David's friend, like Mark Cuban, like they have some of these big names out there that are pushing for more people with disabilities to be included in society. And as long as we have those big front runners thinking about it, I think we're going to see it more often. I think what we're in danger of is what happens when you have a world who's run by, presidents of the United States who don't believe in medicine and don't like disabled people and try to put them back in institutions. And, that's the representation I worry. But I think sometimes we forget about our past. And I think as professionals, we're obligated to remind people in our fellow circles that it was within my lifetime as a 40-year-old that a McDonald's could ask me to leave because their customers didn't want to watch a disabled person eat some chicken nuggets. That was in my lifetime. That wasn't a space age ago. That was 30 years. So we're not that far into the fight for disability yet. And I think we're just beginning.
Steve, thank you so much for sharing all of this. It has been so insightful. My background is in rehab medicine, and I'm just thinking about how I've never learned about the role of adaptive gaming during my residency. What are your thoughts about including this type of knowledge in a residency curriculum or something like that? Is there any initiative like that? What are your thoughts?
I would love for that to be a thing, honestly. Great question. We have recently received a grant from Dell Technologies that gave us about $100,000 to reach out to universities to start teaching in the early OT/PT curriculums about disability and about gaming and how it can help the patients in a much more fundamental way that people may be considering. And right now, it's a vastly underfunded mandate. It's something that people are not yet really latched onto. And I can't really answer for you why that is. I can only assume it's the old guard that I referred to long ago, because the people with the biggest purse strings, they still think that an Etch-a-Sketch is high-end technology, and it's just not. There's a lot more to it out there. And so I wish and I hope that more people continue to find out about curriculums that use adaptive technology. I do think it is perforating the market. I do think it's getting out there more. I hope people take advantage of things like Able Gamers just started offering a class. You can actually look it up right now. It's called accessible.games. It's accessible player experiences. And you can go learn about all the things that we tell developers from any walk of life on how they can design a more inclusive environment from the ground up. And it's not just for developers, it's for anybody who wants to figure out how to utilize video games in any sort of fashion in a professional manner. And we haven't put zero marketing dollars behind this initiative, and every single class has been full so far. Every single one. We've already run about 6, and we plan to run another one every 6 months for the foreseeable future. So hopefully more and more colleges will step forward and decide to add this to their curriculum. At the moment, though, I think we've all got to keep working on that old guard and convincing them that it's something worth talking about.
I got to jump in and volunteer. You've obviously got at least 5 PTs in this group who have deep experience in using technology in clinical practice day to day, as well as 2 physiatrists. If you need guest lecturers for PT schools, we are at your disposal. I've got to say that.
Yeah, I love that.
I actually had a class. I mean, it was one class, so I'm not going to say like it was included, but I mean, my neuro professor did make a point to bring someone in from the outside and do this. And I used, gaming in one rotation. So there's your, it's there. Is it there enough? No.
No, at least you did have somewhat of some exposure to it. But I hope that, people like Dell and organizations that have those purse strings keep seeing a value in it and keep giving money to the colleges to teach these courses, because let's be honest, just like our friend Laura, if you don't know that it's a therapy out there that can help people, then you're not going to prescribe it or push it towards your patients. So, we've got to do a better job of making sure that the helpers know that this service is out there.
Absolutely. It's a good way to move forward.
Guys in the office is like, can you bill for it? You can bill for it, right? Good. Just making sure. I didn't want to do it.
Okay, our time's almost up. So Steve, thank you so much. That was so great to chat to you. And, I've learned so much from you just in this hour. I'm sure everyone else has. Any parting shots for the team?
Jimmy and David are both evil, and you should torture them whenever you can. Every time you make fun of them, remember you're making this disabled gamer smile. So thank you for that. Torture them whenever possible. No, I think that we have to remember we're all in this together, and just remember that for those of you who watch, me on social media like Jimmy does, or watching any advocates out there, even if you see them fighting with each other, even if you see some disagreements, even if you have disagreements within your own team, remember that sometimes personalities clash, but at the end of the day, we're all trying to fight for the same thing. We don't always agree on the way that it needs to get done, but we do agree that we do need to increase the value and opportunity of people with disabilities by giving them access to more of the world. And I think we can all agree that it's something that needs to happen, and today.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Steve. Thanks everyone for coming. And David will do the first lecture for you whenever you need him.
Count me in. Yeah, thanks for really picking up that torch, Jamie, for torturing David from right really taking that to heart.
Well, thanks for having me, everybody. I hope you learned something today, and that you weren't too bored.
Thanks, Steve.
Thank you, Steve.
Bye, everyone.
Talk again soon.